Some 911 calls are short, some are chaotic, and some end in complete silence. Every story in this video comes from reported police calls in Pennsylvania. Calls that started ordinary and ended with something no officer could explain. You're about to hear patterns most people ignore until it's too late. If you want true horror stories based on real reports and real locations, subscribe to Vesper Shroud, because some calls were never meant to be answered. Story 1. Call from Ridgeway. I work night dispatch for rural Pennsylvania County, and there are certain calls you never forget, no matter how badly you want to. The call came in at 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. The screen showed a landline from Ridgeway, a dying coal town where half the houses stand empty and the other half should be. A woman, his voice came through shaking, barely above a whisper, saying there was someone in her house. Someone who should not be there. Someone moving through the rooms downstairs while she hid in her bedroom closet with the door locked. I have been doing this job for 11 years. I know fear when I hear it. This was different. This was the kind of fear that makes your skin feel too tight, the kind that sits in your stomach like swallowed ice. I told her to stay calm, to stay quiet, to keep the line open while I dispatched units to her address. The nearest patrol was 20 minutes out. 20 minutes is a lifetime when you are hiding in the dark listening to footsteps that should not exist. She whispered that she lived alone, that she had locked every door and window before bed, that she did not know how anyone could have gotten inside. The house was old, she said, built in 1923, and it made sounds at night, but this was not the house settling. This was deliberate. This was someone searching. I kept her talking, kept her focused on my voice, kept her mind away from the terror climbing the stairs toward her. I asked her name. She said it was Catherine. I asked if she had family nearby. She said no. I asked if there was anywhere else in the room she could hide if the closet door opened. That is when I heard it. A second voice on the line. Soft, distant, speaking at the exact same time Catherine spoke. Answering my questions a fraction of a second before she did. Saying the same words in the same cadence but with a tone that felt wrong. Like hearing your own voice play back on a recording that sounds nothing like you thought it would. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood up. I asked Catherine if someone else was there with her. If someone else was in the closet. She said no. She insisted she was completely alone. Her voice was frantic now, confused, asking why I would ask such a horrifying thing when she was already so scared. But I could hear it, clear as anything. That second voice layered beneath hers like a shadow that had learned to speak. I have listened to that recording dozens of times since that night. Everyone in the department has. The audio is clean. There is no static, no interference, no technical explanation. Two voices, one human, one something else, both coming from the same location in that house. Catherine kept whispering that she could hear the footsteps getting closer, that they had reached the top of the stairs, that they were in the hallway outside her bedroom door. She was crying now, trying to stay silent but unable to control the sounds of her own terror. I told her help was coming, that she needed to hold on just a little longer, that everything would be okay even though I was not sure I believed it myself. The footsteps stopped outside her bedroom door. She went completely silent. I could hear her breathing, shallow and quick, the kind of breathing that comes right before you break. I could hear something else too. A sound like fabric brushing against wood, like something was standing just on the other side of that door, listening to her the same way she was listening to it. Then the second voice spoke again. This time without Catherine saying anything first. This time on its own. It said my name. Not her name, mine. The name I had never spoken during that call. The name that exists nowhere in the emergency dispatch system except on my employee badge. It said my name in that wrong voice that sounded almost but not quite human, and then it laughed. A soft, knowing laugh that made every instinct in my body scream to hang up the phone and run. Catherine heard it too. She started screaming, asking who that was, asking what was happening, begging me to explain what was inside her house. But I had no answers. I had nothing but my own rising dread and the knowledge that something deeply wrong was occurring on the other end of that line. The bedroom door opened. I heard it clearly. The old hinges creaking, the heavy wood scraping across carpet. Catherine, screaming, stopped. Just cut off mid-sound like someone had pressed a button. The line stayed open. I could hear movement now. Slow and deliberate, crossing the bedroom floor toward the closet where she was hiding. I was yelling into my headset, trying to get a response, trying to confirm the location for the units that were still 12 minutes out. 12 minutes, an eternity measured in heartbeats and mounting terror. The closet door opened. Then nothing. Complete silence. No screaming, no struggle, no sounds of violence or confrontation. Just an empty quiet that felt worse than any noise could have been. That quiet lasted for 17 seconds. I counted every one of them. When the silence broke, it was not Catherine who spoke. It was the other voice. Clear now, unmuffled, speaking directly into the phone with perfect clarity. It thanked me for my time. It said Catherine would not be needing assistance anymore. It said other things too. Things I will not repeat. Things about the house and what lived in its walls and how long it had been waiting for someone to come home. Then the line went dead. The units arrived 14 minutes later. They found the front door locked from the inside. All windows secure. No signs of forced entry. Catherine's car in the driveway. Her purse on the kitchen counter. Her phone still clutched in her hand inside the bedroom closet. The call log showing our conversation lasting exactly 19 minutes. They found Catherine too, sitting on her bed, calm, quiet, staring at the wall with eyes that did not blink. When the officers tried to speak to her, she did not respond. When they touched her shoulder, she turned her head slowly and smiled. A smile that did not reach her eyes. A smile that looked practiced, like she was remembering how faces were supposed to work. She spoke then, said she was fine, said there had been a misunderstanding, said she thought someone was in the house but she had been mistaken. Just her imagination playing tricks in the dark. She was sorry for wasting everyone's time. Everything was perfectly fine now. The officers noted her strange affect, her flat tone, the way she would not make eye contact. They asked if she wanted to come to the station, speak to someone, get checked out by a medical professional. She declined, said she just wanted to go back to sleep. They could not force her. She was coherent, not in immediate danger, not making threats. They had no legal grounds to remove her from her own home. They left her there. The next day I called the number back. Catherine answered. Her voice was normal now, cheerful even, like nothing had happened. She said she did not remember making any call to emergency services. She said she had slept through the entire night without waking once. She said she had never been happier, never felt more at peace in her home. I asked about the intruder. She said there was no intruder. There had never been an intruder. Her house was old and safe and she loved it very much. I asked if she remembered speaking to me. She said no. Then she said yes. Then she laughed that same soft knowing laugh I had heard on the recording and hung up. The department reviewed the call, reviewed the response, reviewed the audio evidence that proved something impossible had occurred in that house on that October morning. They filed it away, called it a technical anomaly, told me to forget about it and move on to the next emergency because there are always more emergencies and never enough time to dwell on the ones that defy explanation. But I cannot forget. I cannot move on, because Catherine still lives in that house in Ridgeway, still answers her phone when it rings, still sounds perfectly normal during the day. And because 3 weeks ago, I received another call, different address, different town, different woman hiding in a different closet from something that should not be there. I gave her the same instructions, the same reassurances, the same promises that help was coming. Then I heard it again, that second voice beneath hers, that shadow learning to speak, answering my questions before she could, saying things she had not yet said. This time I recognized it. It was Catherine's voice. The call is still active in my system. Still open, still transmitting even though no one speaks anymore. Sometimes late at night when the dispatch center is quiet and I am alone with my screens and my headset, I can hear something moving through that open line. I can hear doors opening in houses I cannot see. I can hear footsteps in hallways that exist in places I cannot name. And sometimes, when the night is darkest and the fear is strongest, I hear my own voice coming back through that line, speaking words I have not yet said, answering questions that have not yet been asked, learning, practicing, getting ready to call someone else, getting ready to move into another house where the door is locked from the inside and the windows stay secure and no one ever really leaves once they have been found. I still work dispatch. I still take calls. I still send help to people who need it, but now I wonder who answers when I am not listening. I wonder what speaks through the quiet static between words. I wonder what waits in the houses where no one should be home. And I wonder, every single night, which call will be the one where I hear my own voice on the other end of the line, already inside my house, already climbing my stairs, already standing outside my door with the patience of something that has been waiting forever. The call from Ridgeway taught me something terrifying, something I cannot unknow. Some voices are not meant to be heard. Some shadows are not meant to speak. And some houses in rural Pennsylvania towns hold things that have been hungry for so long that when someone finally comes home, they never leave the same way they arrived. if they leave at all. Story 2. Doubler. My name is Michael Garrett. What I'm about to tell you happened in Pennsylvania on October 14th, and nobody wants to believe it. Not the state police, not the FBI, not the news stations that briefly covered it before moving on to the next story. But I was there. I heard every second of it. And I cannot unknow what I now know about what lives in the darkness between this world and something else entirely. I was a 911 dispatcher for Pike County for 17 years. 17 years of drunk drivers, domestic violence calls, overdoses, and routine welfare checks. You learn to handle almost anything when your job is to stay calm while chaos unfolds on the other end of the line. But nothing had prepared me for Officer David Chen, and nothing could have prepared me for what would happen that night when he drove alone to Blackwood Road. The call came in at 8:47 in the evening. A property manager at Westfield Development Company reported that an employee, Marcus Holloway, had missed work for 3 days with no contact. The employee had lived alone in a rental property on Blackwood Road, an old farmhouse surrounded by dense Pennsylvania forest, the kind of place where even cell service felt like a luxury. The property manager was worried. Something did not feel right. That phrase echoes in my head now. Something did not feel right. He was correct about that. Officer Chen was 34 years old, a 12-year veteran with a clean record and a reputation for being reliable and steady. He did not panic. He did not cut corners. When I dispatched him to conduct a welfare check at the property, I noted his calm, measured response. He confirmed the address. He confirmed he was heading out. Standard procedure. Normal. Routine. Everything about that initial interaction suggested this would be like 1,000 other welfare checks. The property was isolated. Access required driving 5 miles down Blackwood Road, which was barely maintained. No streetlights, no other homes nearby, just trees and darkness and the sound of gravel crunching under tires. Officer Chen arrived at 9:23. He reported to dispatch that he was on scene. The farmhouse was dark, he said. No lights visible, no signs of immediate danger. He was going to approach the front door and make contact. I can still hear his voice on the recording. Calm, professional, almost bored. The way a cop sounds when he is doing his job on a regular Tuesday night, conducting his 200th welfare check, expecting nothing unusual. He reported walking up the front steps. He said the door was unlocked. He was entering the property. Standard procedure. 30 seconds of silence followed. Not the silence of a static line. The silence of someone moving through a dark house, opening doors, looking into rooms. I waited. That was my job. Wait and listen. But even then, even in that moment before everything went wrong, I felt something unsettling creeping up my spine. Something eerie about the quality of that silence. Then Officer Chen came back on the line. His voice had changed. Not much. Most people listening to the body cam audio would not have noticed it. But I was trained to hear the subtle shifts in tone that meant a situation was evolving. His breathing was slightly heavier. He was moving faster. He reported finding the property empty. No Marcus Holloway. No sign of recent occupation. The house felt cold inside, he said. The air was wrong. He did not use those exact words, but that is what I understood from his report. Something in that house was disturbing him. I asked if there were any signs of foul play, any evidence of violence or struggle. Officer Chen said no, nothing like that, just the creeping sense that something was not right. Again, that phrase haunted every part of this situation. He said he was going to check the basement and the back rooms. I should have told him to wait. I should have sent backup immediately. But there was nothing concrete to justify that decision. No clear danger, just intuition. And in the world of law enforcement, intuition alone does not keep you moving forward. You need facts. For 3 minutes, I heard Officer Chen moving through the house. Opening closets. Checking the kitchen. His footsteps echoing through rooms that were clearly empty. And then, in the basement, something changed. His breathing stopped. Not the kind of pause where someone is concentrating. The kind of pause where someone has seen something so disturbing, so terrifying, that their body has momentarily shut down the usual responses. He came back on the line. I need backup, he said. His voice was careful, controlled, but beneath that professional calm, I could hear the fear. He said the basement was different from the rest of the house. The air was colder down there. Significantly colder, freezing, in fact, and there were marks on the walls. Dark marks, scratches. He thought, or maybe something else. He was not sure what he was looking at. He needed backup and he needed it fast. I dispatched units immediately. 2 officers were 15 minutes away. The next closest unit was 20 minutes out. I told Officer Chen that backup was coming. He said he understood. He was going to wait at the car. He was going to secure the scene. That was the smart move. That was the right call. But I could hear something in his voice that made me think he did not feel safe even standing outside that house. 11 minutes passed. Officer Chen remained outside the farmhouse, periodically checking in, confirming that backup had not yet arrived. He reported that he was cold, despite being in his patrol car with the engine running. It was unusual for early October. Not impossible, but unusual. The temperature seemed to be dropping. He could see his own breath fogging a windshield. He sounded increasingly tense. His earlier calm was eroding. Then something else happened. Something that made the hair on my arm stand up straight even through the telephone line. Officer Chen reported movement at the farmhouse. He said there was a figure in one of the upstairs windows. A dark shape, watching him. He said it stayed there for a moment, then disappeared. My blood ran cold. The house was supposed to be empty. I had the record of his search. He had been through the entire structure. There was nobody there. I asked him to confirm what he had just reported. He said it again, calmly, clearly. There had been a figure in the window. He had seen it. And now it was gone. This is when Officer Chen made the decision that still haunts me. Instead of waiting for backup, instead of staying in his car with the doors locked, he decided to go back inside. He said he was going to check the upper floor. He was going to find out if someone was actually in that house. I told him to wait for backup. He did not respond. He simply got out of his car and went back inside. The next 3 minutes were a nightmare. I could hear Officer Chen moving through the house again, but this time his movements were hurried. He was climbing stairs. He was opening doors. His breathing was rapid. His heartbeat, so clear through the body cam microphone, was pounding like a drum. He was scared, terrified, actually, and I was listening to it happen in real time, unable to help, unable to do anything but sit in my dispatch center and hear the fear in his voice. He reported finding one of the upstairs bedrooms. He said the door had been closed. He was certain of it. He had checked the upper floor thoroughly before coming back outside. The door had not been opened. Now it was, and the room beyond that doorway smelled wrong. A thick, meaty smell. Putrid, horrifying, like something had been decaying in that space for a very long time. Officer Chen went inside the room. I do not know why. Every instinct should have told him to leave, to get out of that house, to wait for backup, but he went inside anyway. Then he made the call that changed everything. He requested backup again, but this time, his voice was different. Hollow, distant, like he was speaking from somewhere very far away. He said something was terribly wrong. He said he was seeing things that did not make sense. Things that contradicted what he had observed just minutes earlier. He said the room he was in felt impossible. The dimensions were wrong. The walls seemed to bend in ways that made his mind hurt to look at them. He was disoriented. He was feeling a creeping sense of unreality settling over everything. Most people listening to that body cam footage probably thought Officer Chen was having some kind of medical episode. A stroke, maybe, or a panic attack. But I knew him. I had worked with him for years. He was not the type to hallucinate or panic. He was rock solid. If something terrified him enough to make his voice sound like that, then something genuinely horrifying was happening in that house. He said he needed to get out. He was leaving. He was going back to his car and he was locking the doors and he was not going back inside for any reason until backup arrived. His footsteps accelerated. He was running now, down the stairs, through the hallway. He was moving with desperate urgency. The front door. He was through it. He was outside. He could feel the cold night air. He was safe. He was out of that house. He could breathe. He could. Then he made the second backup request. His voice was almost unrecognizable. It was stripped of all professional composure. It was raw and broken and absolutely terrified. He was barely able to form words. He said something was following him. Something had come out of the house behind him. Something was right behind him. He could hear it. He could feel it. It was cold. The air around him had become unbearably cold. His breath was coming in panicked gasps. I heard him reach his car. I heard the door open. I heard him get inside. I heard him slam the door shut. I heard him scream into the radio that backup needed to come now, immediately. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong. Something was happening that he did not understand. The engine was already running. He hit the accelerator. I could hear the sound of gravel spraying. The car was moving fast. Too fast for a driveway. He was losing control. He was panicking. He was driving blind into darkness, trying to escape from something that terrified him more than anything he had ever experienced in his entire life. And then the body cam feed went dead. Not cut off. Not turned off. Dead. The line remained open, but there was nothing. No sound. No audio. Nothing but the ambient silence of a dead frequency. When backup units arrived at the farmhouse 16 minutes later, they found his patrol car. The engine was still running. The driver's side door was still open, but Officer David Chen was gone. Vanished. Completely gone. Not in the house. Not on the property. Not anywhere. They searched the woods around Blackwood Road for 3 days. They brought in dogs. They brought in helicopters. They brought in search and rescue teams. Nobody found anything. No trace. No body. No indication of which direction he had gone or what had happened to him. The official report concluded that Officer Chen had suffered a psychological break, that he had abandoned his vehicle and walked into the forest, likely disoriented and confused, that he was probably in the woods somewhere, deceased from exposure or injuries sustained during his panicked flight through the dark. But I knew better. I had listened to that body cam recording. I had heard the progression from professional calm to absolute terror. I had heard something in that house, something that existed outside the normal parameters of reality, something that had reached out and grabbed hold of Officer David Chen and pulled him into a darkness that swallowed him completely. The farmhouse on Blackwood Road has been investigated thoroughly, multiple times, by police, by the state police, eventually by people I cannot name. It is empty, completely empty. Nothing lives there. Nothing seems to inhabit those rooms. But I know that something does, something that waits. Something that watches the windows. Something that calls out to people in the dark, asking them to come closer, asking them to look deeper, asking them to understand the truth of what exists just beyond the edge of our perception. Marcus Holloway was never found. The property manager who made the initial call quit his job 3 weeks later and moved to Arizona. He told nobody why. I still have his number somewhere. I have never had the courage to call him and ask what he knows, what he suspected. Whether he had ever been to that farmhouse himself and felt the creeping wrongness that seems to emanate from the land itself. I left dispatch work 6 months after the night of October 14th. I could not handle the calls anymore. Every time a 911 call came in about a welfare check, especially in rural areas, I felt that same creeping dread, that same unsettling sense that something was not right. I had heard what happens when officers respond to calls in isolated places. I had heard the progression from confidence to confusion to absolute terror. And I knew that there were things out there, things in the darkness of Pennsylvania, things in the forgotten places and abandoned properties, things that did not follow the rules of our normal world. If you are listening to this story on a late night, alone in your home, understand that what I am telling you is true. Every word, every detail. Officer Chen is still missing. His case is still open. And somewhere in Pennsylvania, there is a farmhouse on Blackwood Road where something waits. Something eerie and patient. Something that has learned how to call people to it. How to terrify them. How to pull them into a darkness from which they cannot escape. The files are sealed now. The body cam footage exists only in classified archives. The official story remains that Officer Chen suffered a breakdown and disappeared into the woods. But the people who listened to that recording, the people who heard the fear in his voice, the people who understand that something genuinely horrifying happened in that house, we know the truth. And we know that the danger did not end with Officer Chen. It is still there, still waiting, still watching the windows at night, still calling out to lone officers responding to welfare checks, still hungry for contact with our world. And sooner or later, it will call again, and someone else will answer, and someone else will hear the wrongness, and someone else will try to escape, and someone else will disappear into that terrible, chilling darkness that exists just beyond the reach of our flashlights and our radios and our fragile understanding of reality. Sleep well tonight. Keep your doors locked. And if you ever receive a dispatch call from Blackwood Road in Pennsylvania, do not answer. Do not go. Do not let curiosity override your sense of self-preservation, because something is waiting there, something ancient and patient and utterly terrifying, something that has learned to hunt us, and it is always hungry. If you're noticing how these Pennsylvania police calls all begin the same way, calm, routine, almost harmless, that's not an accident. Vesper Shroud focuses on true horror stories pulled from real emergency situations. Subscribe now, because the next call changes everything. Story 3. Address that should not exist. My name is David Reeves, and I am calling to confess something that I've been unable to tell anyone for almost 4 years. What happened to me on State Road 29 in Pennsylvania was so disturbing, so utterly terrifying that I have spent years convincing myself it was not real. But I know what I saw, I know what I experienced, and I need someone to know before I lose my mind completely. It started on a Tuesday night in October. I was driving home from a work conference in Pittsburgh, about 3 hours from my house in central Pennsylvania. The highway was empty. This was around 11 at night, and the kind of darkness you only find in rural areas was pressing against my windshield like something alive. The kind of eerie, suffocating darkness that makes you feel watched even though you know you're completely alone on that stretch of road. I remember the radio kept cutting in and out, stations fragmenting into static and strange sounds. Music I did not recognize, voices speaking languages I could not identify. The unsettling feeling grew worse with every mile I drove. My phone died at exactly 11:37. I remember because I had been glancing at the time, hoping I was getting close to home. The screen just went black. Not a low battery warning, just dead. This was unusual because my phone had been fully charged that morning, and I had barely used it all day. I decided to pull over at the next exit to find somewhere to charge it or at least orient myself. I was not in an area I recognized, and my old GPS was acting up, the screen flickering and showing roads that did not seem to match what I was actually seeing. I took the exit, and that is when I saw the sign. A small, weathered sign that read Hemlock Hollow Road. Below it, in faded numbers that looked like they had been there for decades, was the address 447. I turned onto that road because I thought maybe there would be a gas station or a small store where I could use a phone. The road curved upward through thick forest, and my headlights barely cut through the darkness ahead. The trees were enormous and ancient-looking, their branches intertwining overhead in a way that created a ceiling of shadow. I could feel the rawness of that place, that creeping, disturbing sense that I should not be there. But I kept driving. After about 2 miles, I saw a driveway marked with the same numbers. 447. There was no house visible from the road, just a mailbox at the end of a long gravel drive. On impulse, I turned in. This was stupid. I knew it was stupid even then, but something pulled me forward. Some inexplicable instinct that made me think this place might have answers to questions I had not even asked yet. The driveway twisted through more forest. My headlights caught glimpses of overgrown vegetation, the skeletal remains of what might have been fence posts, things that could have been structures long since collapsed into rot and time. The air felt different as I drove. It was cold in a way that had nothing to do with October weather. This was a cold that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. Primal, ancient, terrifying in ways I could not explain. My car seemed to resist moving forward, the engine sputtering slightly, the steering wheel growing heavy in my hands. The temperature on my dashboard read 43 degrees, which was impossible given that it had been 68 when I pulled off the highway. The change happened gradually, then suddenly, and I could see my breath fogging the windshield in front of me. Then I reached the house. It was wrong. That is the only word I can use. Wrong. The structure itself seemed almost normal at first glance. A large colonial-style home, paint peeling in long strips like dead skin, windows dark and reflecting nothing. But something about its proportions was off. The angles did not quite match what my eyes were telling my brain. The roof seemed to slope in directions that should not have been possible. The shadows around it seemed deeper than they should have been, as if the darkness there was a physical substance rather than simply the absence of light. I could see shapes moving within those shadows. Not solid shapes, not things with clear definition, but movements, presences, as if the darkness itself was alive and aware of my arrival. The mailbox on the front post had my name on it. Not just any name. My name, David Reeves, written in handwriting I recognized as my own, but could not remember having written. I had just gotten out of my car when my phone suddenly came back to life in my hand. The screen illuminated my face, and I could see the battery indicator showed 90% charge. That was impossible. My phone had been dead for nearly 20 minutes. The time showed 11:42. The date showed October 14th, which was correct. And then I saw the notification. A 911 call. Incoming. From this address. I stared at that screen in disbelief. I had not dialed 911. I had not pressed anything. Yet my phone was ringing with an emergency call originating from 447 Hemlock Hollow Road. The very place I was standing. The very driveway I had just pulled into. My hands were shaking as I answered the call. There was silence on the other end. But it was not empty silence. It was full silence. The kind of silence that seems to have weight and presence. In that silence, I could hear something underneath it. A sound like wind, but not quite. Like voices, but not quite forming words. Like something trying to speak in a language that human ears could not quite process. Then a voice. A man speaking with a Pennsylvania accent, calm and official. The voice asked, "Is anyone there?" "This is 911. We received a distress call from your location. Are you in need of emergency assistance? I looked around the darkness surrounding me. I looked at the house with its wrong angles and impossible shadows. I heard that sound underneath the dispatcher. This voice, that eerie, unsettling howling that seemed to come from the forest itself. I said, yes, I need help. Something very wrong is here. I do not know how, but I called you, or something called you from here. I do not understand what is happening. The dispatcher said, we are dispatching officers to your location now. Can you remain on the line? But then something chilling happened. The dispatcher's voice became static. And beneath the static, I heard it. The same voice, but different. Fractured, like multiple versions of the same dispatcher speaking at the same time. Their words layering over each other in a horrifying, discordant chorus. When the static cleared, a different voice came through. This one was female. She sounded frightened. She said, do not go inside. Whatever you do, do not go inside. I made that mistake. I am still here. I cannot leave. Something is keeping me here. My heart was pounding, the blood rushing through my veins, my pulse throbbing in my neck. The terrifying, primal fear response was flooding my body with adrenaline. Every nerve was screaming at me to run, to flee that place, to get away from whatever was speaking through my phone. I said, who is this? Who are you? The female voice said, I'm Officer Sarah Chen. I responded to the first call from this address 7 years ago. I never left. I have been here every day. Every single day. And now others are here too. Others who called. Others who came. We are all still here. Then another voice cut through. A man. Another officer perhaps. Then another. And another. A terrible, nightmarish cacophony of people trapped and desperate. All speaking at once through the same phone line. All calling from an address that did not exist. All begging me not to go inside the house. I dropped my phone and ran back to my car. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely get the keys in the ignition. When I finally got the engine started, I spun the car around and raced back down that driveway, my headlights catching glimpses of those twisted trees, those collapsed structures, that sense of ancient, primal wrongness. I drove for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes before I saw lights ahead. Civilization. A small town. I pulled into a gas station and immediately asked to use their phone to call the police. The officer I spoke to was kind but clearly skeptical. He said they would send someone to check out Hemlock Hollow Road, but he warned me that there was no address 447 in their records. There was no Hemlock Hollow Road on any official map. In fact, all the land in that area was state forest. Undiv ground. No private property. He asked if I was certain about what I had seen. If I was certain I had not imagined the driveway, the house, the phone call. I insisted that I knew what I had experienced. That it was real. That people were missing from that place. Real emergency responders. Real people trapped in that house. 2 hours later, 4 police cars searched that area. They found the exit I had taken off State Road 29. They found where I said the driveway should be. But they found nothing. No gravel drive. No mailbox. No house. Just forest and darkness and the growing certainty in the officer's eyes that I was unstable. That I was a liar or mentally unwell. They did find something I had not mentioned. A set of tire tracks in the soft earth. Fresh tire tracks that matched my vehicle exactly. But the tracks ended abruptly, in the middle of the forest, as if my car had simply vanished into thin air and then reappeared on the highway. The officer showed me photographs. My hands were shaking as I looked at those impossible tracks. Because I knew they were mine. I knew I had driven in that forest. But the evidence said I could not have. Reality itself seemed to be contradicting what I had experienced. But here's what they did not tell me. In the past 8 years, emergency services in that county had received exactly 14 911 calls from that address. 14 separate incidents. 14 times someone called for help from 447 Hemlock Hollow Road. I researched the history of that land. It took months of digging through county records and historical documents. In 1958, there was a home on that land. A large colonial house owned by a family named Hutchins. On October 14, 1958, exactly 60 years before I drove up that driveway, emergency services received a call from that address. They sent officers. The family had disappeared. All 7 of them. The house was demolished. The land was seized by the state. But on the 60-year anniversary of their disappearance, someone called 911 from that address. But on the 60-year anniversary of their disappearance, someone called 911 from that address. I have spent 4 years trying to understand what happened to me that night. I have tried to convince myself it was a psychological episode, a break from reality, a nightmare that felt real but was not. But I cannot escape the terrible, horrifying truth. That place is real. That address exists in some dimension of reality that we do not have maps for. That house is still there, existing in some pocket of space that should not exist, and it is pulling people in. On October 14th of this year, 14 years after I drove up that driveway, emergency services in Pennsylvania received 9 calls from that address. 9 new calls, 9 new people in peril, 9 new voices trapped in that house, calling for help from a place that does not appear on any map. I know this because I have been monitoring the police scanner every day for the past 4 years, listening for reports, waiting for the terrifying calls to come again. And I received something even more disturbing yesterday. A text message from an unknown number. It contained a single sentence. It said, "The anniversary is coming, and this time, you will answer the call. You will go back. You will finally go inside. My phone is fully charged. I am afraid to go to sleep. I am afraid to answer any phone at all. Because somewhere in Pennsylvania, on a road that does not exist, in a house that disappeared decades ago, something is waiting. Something ancient, something patient, something hungry. If you are listening to this and you live in Pennsylvania, if you have ever seen an address that felt wrong, a road that did not seem right, a place that your mind rejects, stay away. Do not drive up that driveway. Do not answer the call, because whatever exists in that house, whatever has been waiting since 1958, it is not looking for help. It is looking for more people. It is looking for witnesses. It is looking for those who will carry the knowledge of its existence forward. And once you know that address exists, once you have heard the voices calling from that impossible place, you can never truly escape it. The knowledge becomes a haunting that follows you every day. The call is coming. Will you answer? Story 4. Open line. There are sounds that should not exist on an emergency dispatch line, and I heard every single one of them during my shift last November. The call came through at 3:18 in the morning. No voice, no panic. Just an open line transmitting from somewhere in rural Pennsylvania farmland where cell towers are scarce and landlines still run through houses that time forgot. The screen showed coordinates but no registered address, just a location marker blinking in the darkness 20 miles outside of town where nothing should be calling from. I have worked emergency dispatch for 9 years. I know what silence sounds like when someone is too terrified to speak, when they are hiding and cannot risk making noise, when danger is so close that breathing feels too loud. This was different. This silence had weight to it, had presence, had something moving inside it that made my skin crawl even through the digital connection. Then came the scraping. Slow, deliberate, metal on wood. The sound of something being dragged across a floor 1 inch at a time with the patience of something that has nowhere else to be. It would scrape for 5 seconds, stop for 10, then start again. Over and over, a rhythm that felt intentional, like a message being tapped out in a code I could not understand. I followed protocol, announced myself, asked if anyone needed help, asked if they could hear me, asked them to make any sound if they were in danger. The scraping continued, nothing else, just that horrifying drag and pause, coming through crystal clear like whatever was making that sound wanted me to hear it perfectly. I traced the signal. The system took longer than usual, cycling through databases and satellite coordinates before finally pinpointing the source. A farmhouse, built in 1897 according to county records. Abandoned since 2003 when the last registered owner died with no heirs and no one willing to buy property that far from civilization. The house had been sitting empty for over 20 years. No power, no water, no active phone line, but something in that house had called me. I dispatched 2 officers to investigate, Deputy Martinez and Deputy Chen. Good people, experienced, not the type to spook easily or waste time on ghost stories. I told them about the open line, about the scraping sounds, about the impossible phone call from a location that should not have working communications. They acknowledged and headed out into the November darkness toward coordinates that led to nothing but empty fields and forgotten buildings. The line stayed open the entire time. I could hear them driving, could hear the scraping continuing in the background, could hear my own heartbeat getting faster as the minutes ticked by, and that sound never stopped, never changed, never gave me any clue about what was making it or why. Martinez radioed in when they arrived, said the farmhouse looked like every other abandoned property in the county. Peeling paint, broken windows, front porch sagging under the weight of decades. No vehicles, no lights, no signs of life, but the front door was open, hanging crooked on rusted hinges, moving slightly in the wind like it was breathing. They approached with flashlights and service weapons drawn. Standard procedure. Clear the property. Ensure no one is inside. Secure the location. Simple and routine except for the fact that my open line was still transmitting and the scraping had stopped the exact moment their boots hit the porch steps. Complete silence now. The kind that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of every tiny sound your own body makes. I could hear Martinez breathing. Could hear Chen moving carefully through the doorway. Could hear old floorboards creaking under their weight. Then Martinez spoke. Said something felt wrong. Said the house felt like it was watching them. Said the air inside was too cold, too still, too heavy with a presence that made his instincts scream to leave immediately. Chen agreed. Said she had been doing this job for 15 years and had never felt anything like the rawness emanating from that empty farmhouse. But they had a job to do. They moved deeper inside. I listened to everything. Heard them clearing rooms. Heard their footsteps echoing through hollow spaces. Heard them describing what they saw. Empty rooms filled with rotting furniture. Walls covered in peeling wallpaper. A kitchen where dishes still sat on a table like someone had just gotten up and walked away mid-meal 20 years ago and never come back. Then they found the basement door. It was the only door in the entire house that was closed. The only door that looked maintained, the wood still solid, the hinges recently oiled. Martinez tested the handle. Locked. He asked if I wanted them to force entry. I checked the open line. Still transmitting. Still silent. Still waiting. I told them to open it. The lock broke easily. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing stairs descending into absolute darkness that their flashlights could not fully penetrate. The beams seemed to stop halfway down like the shadows were too thick to push through. Chen said she could smell something. Not decay, not mold, something else. Something chemical and organic at the same time. Something that reminded her of hospitals and funeral homes and places where bodies go when life leaves them. They started down the stairs. That is when the scraping started again. Louder now, closer, coming from somewhere below them in that darkness. Both officers froze. I could hear their breathing change, could hear the fear creeping into their voices as they radioed back asking if I was still hearing what they were hearing. I was, every terrible second of it. Martinez wanted to go back up, call for additional units, approach this with more resources and backup. But Chen had spotted something at the bottom of the stairs. A phone, old rotary style, sitting on the concrete floor, cord stretching back into the darkness. And it was off the hook. Receiver lying beside the base. Still connected, still transmitting. That was my open line. That was the call, coming from a phone in a basement that should not have power, in a house that should not have service, from a piece of equipment that looked like it had been waiting decades for someone to finally come down those stairs and find it. Chen approached it slowly. Her flashlight beam illuminated something else. Scratch marks on the floor. Hundreds of them, gouged deep into the concrete in long parallel lines like something with metal claws had been dragged back and forth across the same spot over and over and over until the floor was carved into channels. The scraping on my line matched the marks perfectly. 5 lines, 5 scratches, 5 sounds dragging and pausing and dragging again. Martinez asked what they should do. I told them to secure the phone as evidence and get out of that basement immediately. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was deeply wrong, that this was not a prank or a technical malfunction, that they were standing in a place where something horrifying had happened and might still be happening. Chen reached for the phone. Her hand was 6 inches away when the lights went out. Not in the house. The house had no power. The lights went out in their flashlights. Both of them, simultaneously. Expensive police-issue LED flashlights with fresh batteries that should not fail. They died together, leaving both officers in absolute darkness in a basement they did not know, with a phone that should not work and scratch marks that told a story no one wanted to read. I could still hear everything. Could hear them fumbling for backup lights. Could hear their panic rising. Could hear something else too. Movement in the darkness around them. Slow, heavy, breathing that was not theirs. Breathing that sounded wrong, sounded wet, sounded like it was coming from something that should not be breathing at all. Martinez got his light back on. The beam swept the basement. Empty. Nothing there. Just concrete walls and that phone and those scratch marks and shadows that seemed to pull back from the light like living things retreating into corners where they could not be seen. Then Chen screamed. Something had touched her. She felt it. Cold fingers on the back of her neck. Pressure like a hand gripping. She spun around. Nothing. Martinez aimed his light. Nothing. But I could hear it on my line. I could hear something moving. I could hear that scraping again, but this time it was all around them, coming from the walls, from the ceiling, from underneath the floor itself. They ran, both of them, training and protocol abandoned in favor of pure survival instinct. They bolted up those stairs faster than they had ever moved in their lives. hit the main floor, headed for the exit. The front door that had been open when they arrived was closed now. Locked from the inside, they hit it together with their combined weight and it gave way, splintering outward as they tumbled onto the porch and into the cold November air. They did not stop running until they were back at their patrol car. Both of them shaking. Both of them looking back at that farmhouse where every window was now dark and every door was now closed and nothing moved in the shadows except the memories of what they had felt down in that basement. The line finally went dead. After 93 minutes of transmission, it simply ended. I tried calling back. Nothing. The number did not exist. The coordinates showed nothing but empty land. Even the satellite imagery updated while I watched, showing the farmhouse that had been there for over a century now appeared as nothing but an empty field. The department sent a full team out the next morning. Different address, different location, 10 miles from where Martinez and Chen swore they had been. They found a farmhouse matching the description, but it had been burned down in 1964. Nothing left but a foundation and a basement filled with debris. No phone, no scratch marks, no evidence of anything except time and decay. But I have the recording. 93 minutes of audio that should not exist. I have listened to it more times than I should have. I have heard things in that recording that were not apparent during the live call. Sounds beneath the scraping, whispers in the silence, words in a language I do not recognize being spoken by voices that do not sound human. And at the very end, right before the line goes dead, I hear something that makes my blood freeze every time. My own voice, speaking from somewhere in that basement, saying words I have not yet said, answering questions that have not yet been asked, making a call that has not yet been placed. Martinez transferred to a different county. Chen quit law enforcement entirely. They do not talk about what happened that night. They do not return calls from researchers or paranormal investigators. They do not want to remember what they felt in that darkness or what touched Chen in that basement or what was breathing beside them when their lights went out. But I remember, I have to, because the open line keeps calling back. Different times, different nights. Always when I am alone at dispatch. Always showing coordinates that lead to places that should not exist. Always transmitting sounds that make no sense until I realize they are scratch marks being carved into concrete by something that has been trapped underground for longer than I can imagine. Something that is trying very hard to communicate. Something that knows my voice now. Something that is learning to speak by listening to every word I say during every emergency call I take. Last week I received another open line. No scraping this time, just breathing, and underneath that breathing, a voice. My voice, saying my name, asking me for help. Telling me there is something in my house, something in my basement, something that has been waiting for me to come home. I do not have a basement. I live in a second-floor apartment, but when I got home that night, there was a door in my hallway that had never been there before. A door with a handle that felt cold, a door that was locked, a door that had scratch marks on the inside. I have not opened it. I do not think I should, but every night I can hear something behind it, scraping, dragging. Waiting with the patience of something that has already learned my voice and is now learning my habits and will eventually learn how to open doors that should stay closed. The open line is still active somewhere in rural Pennsylvania. Still transmitting. Still recording. Still teaching things that live in basements how to sound human enough to call for help. And when they finally learn, when they finally perfect the voice, when they finally make that call that sounds exactly like someone you love begging you to save them, I hope you remember this story. I hope you remember that some calls should not be answered. Some doors should not be opened. Some sounds in the darkness are not asking for rescue. They are just practicing for the day they no longer need to ask. Story 5. Ones who knock first. I received a phone call that should have been impossible. Everything about it violated the laws of time, causality, and sanity. And I could not explain it to anyone without sounding like I had lost my mind completely. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I work dispatch for the Martinsville Police Department in West Virginia. I have been doing this job for 19 years. I have taken thousands of emergency calls. I have heard people in their worst moments. I have heard mothers reporting kidnapped children. I have heard men having heart attacks. I have heard the sounds of violence and desperation and pain. But nothing could have prepared me for the call that came in on March the 23rd at 2:37 in the afternoon. The creepy part was not just the content of the call. It was the timing. It was the impossible accuracy of what the caller described. And it was the fact that I verified every single word of it in real time, watching it unfold exactly as she had predicted. The call came from a woman named Eleanor Webb. Her voice was shaking, frightened, desperate. But what made my blood run cold was that she did not sound panicked. She sounded like someone who had already experienced something terrifying and was trying to warn me about what was about to happen. She said her name. She gave an address on Rosewood Lane. And then she said something that made no sense. She said that an officer was going to arrive at her house in exactly 8 minutes and 43 seconds. She said she needed to describe him to dispatch before he arrived. She said I needed to write down everything she told me because after he knocked on her door, everything would change. She said I would understand what she meant, but only after I heard the knocking. I should have assumed she was mentally ill. I should have flagged the call as a possible psychiatric situation. That was my training. That was protocol. But something in her voice made me listen. Something in the desperate certainty of her words made me pay close attention to everything she said. Eleanor Webb told me that the officer who was arriving would be named Thomas Ward. He would be driving Unit 3. He would arrive at her house in a patrol car that had a small dent on the front bumper on the driver's side. When he stepped out of the car, his left shoe would be untied. He would walk up the driveway slowly, looking around nervously, like he was uncertain about what he was walking into. He would climb the porch steps, and then he would knock 3 times on the front door. The knocking pattern would be distinctive. 2 quick knocks, followed by a pause, followed by 1 final knock. Knock, knock, pause, knock. I listened to this without interrupting. I was noting the time. 2:37. She had said 8 minutes and 43 seconds. That meant the officer would arrive at 2:45 and 51 seconds. I checked the computer to see if there was an active unit in the area. There was. Unit 3, driven by Officer Thomas Ward. He was approximately 12 minutes away from Rosewood Lane. Eleanor Webb said she understood how this sounded. She understood that I thought she was crazy. But she was not crazy. She was terrified. She said something was wrong at her house. Something eerie. She had been home alone all day. She had heard knocking at the door around 1 o'clock. But when she looked through the peephole, there was nobody there. She had heard the sound of footsteps walking away from her porch. They sounded wrong, though. The footsteps did not match any normal pattern of walking. They were irregular, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes like something was dragging itself across the ground. Then, about 20 minutes before her call to dispatch, she had heard the knocking again. This time, 3 distinct knocks with a specific pattern. Knock, knock, pause, knock. When she looked through the peephole, she saw a police officer standing on her porch. But something was wrong with the way he looked. His movements were jerky, unnatural, and his face did not look quite right. His skin seemed gray. His eyes were too dark. He was trying to open her front door as if he expected it to be unlocked. Eleanor Webb did not open the door. She called 911. And when she reached dispatch, when she reached me, she realized something that made her voice turn to absolute horror. The officer on her porch, the one who had been trying to open her door, was Officer Thomas Ward. She knew this because she recognized him. She had seen him at the grocery store before. She knew what he looked like. But the thing standing on her porch wearing his uniform, the thing that looked like Officer Thomas Ward but was also somehow completely different, had not knocked yet. It was still standing there, still trying the door, and according to her description, the real Officer Thomas Ward, the actual person, would arrive at her house in approximately 5 minutes and 30 seconds. I did not know what to say. I told her to lock her doors. I told her to stay away from any windows. I said I was dispatching additional units to her location. She said not to do that. She said that the more officers who came to the house, the more dangerous it would become. She said she did not know what was standing on her porch or where it had come from, but she knew that it was attracted to law enforcement. It wanted the officers to come. I checked the computer. Officer Ward was still en route. 7 minutes away, then 6 minutes away. Eleanor Webb stayed on the phone with me. She was breathing heavily. I could hear her moving through her house. She said the thing that looked like Officer Ward had stopped trying the door. It was standing at the window now. Looking in, she could see it through the curtain. It was tilting its head, studying her house from different angles. Watching, always watching. I kept the phone line open. I was watching the clock. I was tracking Officer Ward as he got closer and closer to Rosewood Lane. 2 minutes away, 1 minute away. Eleanor Webb started describing sounds. She said she could hear breathing coming from outside the house. Not the breathing of a person. Something else. Something that was not quite right. The breathing was rhythmic, but the rhythm did not match any natural pattern. It was like listening to something that was trying to imitate human respiration but had never quite gotten it right. Officer Ward was 50 seconds away. Eleanor Webb whispered something that I almost missed. She said the thing on her porch had turned to face the driveway. It had seen Officer Ward approaching. It was waiting for him. It was standing completely still. And it was smiling. She said the smile was wrong. Her voice cracked when she said that. She said that things should not be able to smile. Nothing that looked like that should be capable of that expression. Officer Ward arrived at her house. I heard the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. I heard the car door opening. I heard his footsteps on the gravel. Eleanor Webb was silent. She was still on the phone, but she was not speaking. She was listening. 30 seconds passed. I could hear Officer Ward walking up the driveway. His footsteps were steady, normal. He was reaching the porch steps. I heard them creak as he climbed them. Eleanor Webb had said he would look nervous. I did not know if that was accurate from a distance, but I was waiting. I was waiting for the knock that she had predicted so accurately. Officer Ward reached the front door. I could see the exact moment in the dispatch log when he arrived at the address. 2:45 and 51 seconds. Exactly as Eleanor Webb had predicted. To the second. And then I heard it. Through the phone line connected to Eleanor Webb. I heard the knocking on her front door. Knock, knock, pause, knock. Exactly the pattern she had described. My entire body went cold. How was this possible? How could she have known the exact second he would arrive? How could she have predicted that specific pattern of knocking? Eleanor Webb did not answer the door. She stayed on the phone with me. She said something was happening. Something terrible. She said the thing that had been standing on her porch was moving again. It was moving toward Officer Ward. They were standing close to each other now. Very close. And the thing that looked like Officer Ward was changing. I do not know how to describe what Eleanor Webb told me happened next. She said the two figures on her porch were merging, blending together, like one was absorbing the other, like they were becoming a single entity. She said Officer Ward was trying to scream, but his voice was being swallowed by something deeper, something that resonated in a frequency that hurt to hear. Then everything stopped. The sounds on the phone line ceased. The heavy breathing was gone. The sounds of struggle were gone. There was just silence. I was still listening, still waiting, still holding my breath. Eleanor Webb came back on the line. Her voice was different, colder. She said Officer Ward was no longer interested in knocking on doors. He had found what he was looking for. He had been looking for the thing that was pretending to be him. And he had found it. And they had found each other. I asked her what she meant. She did not answer. I asked if she was safe. She said she was locked inside her house. She was safe for now. But Officer Ward was no longer on her porch. He had gone, merged with the other thing, become something else. She said he would not be responding to any more calls. He would not be going home to his family. He was part of something larger now. Something that existed in the spaces between moments. Something that had learned how to move through time in ways that should not be possible. I immediately contacted the police supervisor. I reported the call and the impossible accuracy of Eleanor Webb, his predictions. I told him that Officer Ward might be in danger. Units were dispatched to his residence. They found his house empty. His family was gone. No signs of struggle. No indication of where they had gone or when they had left. It was like they had simply ceased to exist in this reality. The official investigation concluded that Eleanor Webb had made a lucky guess about when Officer Ward would arrive. That she had imagined the rest. That Officer Ward had taken family leave to go out of state. Nobody mentioned how she had described him with perfect accuracy before he arrived. Nobody mentioned how the knocking pattern matched exactly what she had predicted. Nobody mentioned the timeline of her call lined up with mathematical precision to the moment he knocked on her door. I still work dispatch. I still take emergency calls. But I have changed since that day. I listen to calls more carefully now. I pay attention to things that do not quite add up. Because there are people out there who see things differently. People who perceive time in ways that I cannot understand. People who know about the things that wear uniforms and knock on doors and try to merge with the real people they are pretending to be. Eleanor Webb does not live on Rosewood Lane anymore. She left town 3 weeks after the incident. She left a note with her forwarding address, but I have never contacted her. I have not had the courage. I know that if I reach out to her, she will tell me more things. She will describe more impossible events. She will explain more about what is happening in the spaces between moments. Where things exist that should not exist. Where the laws of time and causality are merely suggestions that can be bent and broken and remade into something horrifying. The scary truth is that Officer Ward was not the first. I have pulled the old dispatch logs. There are other calls. Other people who knew things they should not have known. Other callers who predicted events with impossible accuracy. Other officers who arrived at houses where things were waiting for them. They all disappeared. They all became something else. And they are still out there, responding to calls, knocking on doors, trying to merge with the real officers in this world. Sometimes I get calls from people who sound normal at first. They report break-ins or medical emergencies or welfare checks. But then I listen more carefully and I realize they are predicting what will happen. They are describing the officer who will respond before I even send him. They are warning me about the dangers of the call before the officer ever arrives at the location. I always try to stop the dispatch. I always try to prevent the officer from going to that address. But my supervisor tells me I am paranoid. He tells me I am seeing patterns that do not exist. He tells me that Eleanor Webb messed with my head and now I am reading significance into normal coincidences. But I know the truth. I have seen the dispatch logs. I have listened to the calls. I have watched the timelines line up with terrifying precision. And I know that there is something out there in the space between moments, something that has learned how to predict the future and use that knowledge to hunt the people who are trying to help others. Something eerie and patient and impossibly intelligent. Something that wears uniforms and knocks on doors and tries to become part of our world. The chilling reality is that every day I sit at my dispatch station, I am potentially sending officers towards something that should not exist. And I cannot stop it. I cannot warn them properly because nobody believes me. I can only listen to their voices come through the radio, sounding normal and professional and completely unaware of what is waiting for them at the address. I can only hear the moment when their voices change, the moment when they realize something is wrong. And then, silence. Officer Thomas Ward was supposed to go home that day. He was supposed to kiss his wife and play with his children and live a normal life. Instead, he encountered something that exists outside of time, something that knows what will happen before it happens, something that waited on Eleanor Webb's porch for him to arrive so it could pull him into a space where past and future collapse into a single terrifying moment. And somewhere out there, that thing is still responding to emergency calls. Still wearing a uniform, still knocking on doors in that distinctive pattern. Knock, knock, pause, knock, still trying to merge with more officers, pulling them into the darkness between moments where nothing should exist. If you are listening to this story and you work in law enforcement, you understand what I am telling you. You understand the danger of the calls that do not quite add up. The ones where someone seems to know too much. The ones where the timing is too perfect. Answer those calls with extreme caution. Watch for the patterns. Listen for the wrongness in the air. Because the things that hunt you are always one step ahead. They know when you are coming. They know exactly how long it will take you to arrive. And they are waiting. Sleep well tonight if you can. But know that somewhere in the darkness, something is knocking. Something is predicting. Something is preparing to hunt those who try to protect others. And the most terrifying part is that we cannot stop it. We can only listen. We can only wait. We can only hope that the next call that comes through dispatch does not describe our own arrival with impossible accuracy. Because if it does, we already know what happens next. Story 6. Number that would not die. Some phone numbers should stay dead, but the one that kept calling my dispatch center in Pennsylvania refused to stop breathing. The first call came through on a Tuesday night in September. The screen displayed a number I recognized immediately because I had seen it in our disconnected log just 3 weeks earlier. A landline from a house on Maple Ridge Road, officially terminated after the owner passed away with no family to claim the property. The phone company had cut service. The account was closed. The number should not have been able to reach anyone. But it was calling me. I answered using standard protocol, announcing myself and asking the nature of the emergency. What came back was not a voice. It was breathing, deep and wet and rhythmic like someone drawing air through damaged lungs. The kind of breathing you hear in hospitals when machines are doing most of the work but the body keeps trying anyway. It went on for 47 seconds before the line went dead. I logged it as a misdial, equipment malfunction, something technical that would sort itself out. I have worked emergency dispatch for 12 years and have heard every kind of scary prank call and broken connection and system glitch that exists. This felt different, but I pushed that feeling down and moved on to the next call because there is always a next call and never enough time to worry about the ones that make no sense. The number called back 6 hours later during the graveyard shift when I was alone at the console. Same dead number, same impossible connection. This time the breathing was accompanied by something else. Knocking, distant but deliberate. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 3 more, over and over in the background while that wet breathing continued in the foreground. I asked who was there. I asked what they needed. I asked if this was an emergency. The knocking stopped. The breathing stopped. For 5 seconds there was perfect silence. Then a sound like fingernails scraping across a wooden surface came through so loud and so close that I yanked the headset away from my ear. The line went dead again. I ran the number through every database we had access to. County records showed the house belonged to a man named Edward Marsh who died of respiratory failure in June at age 73. He had lived alone for the last 15 years after his wife left him. No children, no siblings, no one to inherit the property that sat empty now waiting for the county to decide what to do with it. The phone service had been disconnected on July 2nd. 2 months ago, There was no possible way that number could make outbound calls. The physical line had been cut. The account no longer existed in any system. But it called me again the next night, and the night after that, and every night for a week straight. Always between midnight and 4 in the morning when the darkness feels heaviest and fear creeps easiest into tired minds. Always the same breathing, always the same knocking, always ending with that horrifying scraping sound that made my skin crawl and my hands shake. I reported it to my supervisor. He listened to the recordings and agreed something was deeply wrong. Something unsettling and creepy that went beyond normal technical failures. He contacted the phone company. They confirmed the line was dead, had been physically disconnected at the junction box, could not possibly be transmitting anything. They suggested our system was glitching, pulling old data from cached memory, creating phantom calls that seemed real but were just digital echoes. That theory lasted until the night I answered the call and heard my own name whispered underneath the breathing. Not spoken, whispered, like someone was saying it from very far away or from somewhere they should not be. My actual name, not my dispatcher ID, not my call sign, my birth name that appears nowhere in the emergency system, that I have never spoken on any recorded line, that should be unknown to whoever or whatever was calling from that disconnected number. I hung up immediately. My heart was pounding. My mouth was dry. Every instinct screamed that I needed to understand what was happening before it got worse, before whatever was on the other end of that line learned more about me than just my name. I drove to Maple Ridge Road the next morning. The house stood at the end of a long gravel driveway surrounded by overgrown fields and dying trees. 2 stories, white paint peeling away in long strips. Windows dark and empty like eye sockets. The front door hung slightly open, revealing nothing but shadows inside. I should not have gone alone. I should have requested an officer to accompany me. But something about this felt personal now, felt like a mystery that was specifically mine to solve. The calls were coming to my console. My name had been whispered. This was between me and whatever haunted that dead phone line. The interior smelled like rot and abandonment. Furniture covered in dust sheets. Family photos still hanging on walls showing a younger Edward Marsh with a woman who must have been his wife before she left. Everything frozen in time, waiting for someone who would never return. I found the phone in the kitchen. Old rotary model still mounted on the wall. The cord had been cut clean through, the severed ends dangling uselessly. No connection to anything. No power source. No way for it to function. But when I touched the receiver, it was warm. I pulled my hand back like I had been burned. The phone should have been room temperature, cold even in the September chill. Instead, it radiated heat like something living had been holding it recently, pressing it close, breathing into it while it called out into the darkness looking for someone to answer. I heard the knocking then, coming from upstairs. 3 slow knocks, a pause. 3 more, the exact same pattern from the calls. I looked up at the ceiling where the sound originated and saw something that made my blood run cold. A dark stain spreading across the plaster, old and brown like dried blood or something worse, and it was directly above where the phone hung on the wall. The knocking continued. I should have left, should have run back to my car and called for backup and let someone else deal with whatever was making that sound. But I needed to know, needed to see what was up there, needed to understand why a dead man's phone kept calling me in the middle of the night. The stairs creaked under my weight. Every step felt like a mistake. The knocking grew louder as I climbed. More insistent, more desperate, like whatever was making that sound knew I was coming and wanted me to hurry. The bedroom door was closed. The knocking came from inside. I turned the handle and pushed it open. Edward Marsh was sitting on his bed. Not a body, not a corpse. He was sitting upright, hands folded in his lap, eyes open and staring at the wall. He looked exactly like his photos except for the gray pallor of his skin and the stillness that no living person could maintain. He was not breathing, was not moving, was not alive in any way that made medical sense. But his hand was raised, and he was knocking 3 times against the nightstand beside his bed. Pause. 3 more times. The sound echoing through the empty house and somehow transmitting through a disconnected phone line to a dispatcher who had made the mistake of answering. I could not move, could not speak, could not process what I was seeing. This man had died 3 months ago, had been found by a neighbor, had been removed by the coroner and cremated according to county records. But he was here, and he was knocking, and when his eyes slowly turned to look at me, I saw something in them that was worse than death. I saw awareness. I saw recognition. I saw a terror so profound that it had refused to let go even after his body stopped working. His mouth opened. No sound came out, but I could see him trying. Could see him fighting against whatever kept him trapped in this nightmare state between living and dying. His hand kept knocking, kept sending that signal out through the impossible phone connection, kept trying to tell someone what had happened to him. I ran, down the stairs, through the house, out the door and into daylight that felt too bright and too normal for what I had just witnessed. I got in my car and drove away from that house as fast as I could while my mind tried to make sense of something that had no rational explanation. The calls stopped after that. The number never appeared on my console again. I filed a report with my supervisor but did not include what I had seen in that bedroom because no one would believe me. How could they? Dead men do not sit up and knock on furniture. Disconnected phones do not carry messages from whatever comes after death. But I know what I saw. I know what Edward Marsh was trying to tell me with those knocks. He was still there, still trapped in that house, still aware and conscious and experiencing something so horrifying that even death could not end it. 3 weeks later, I got a call from county services. They had finally gotten around to clearing out the Marsh property. The crew reported finding something disturbing in the bedroom. A circle of symbols carved into the floorboards under the bed. Old symbols, occult symbols, the kind that appear in books about binding rituals and trapping spirits and keeping souls tethered to places they should be able to leave. Edward Marsh had carved them himself. The investigation found his journal hidden in the basement. Pages and pages of increasingly desperate writing about his fear of dying, his terror of what might come after, his research into ways to prevent his consciousness from moving on. He had performed a ritual, had bound himself to the house, had anchored his awareness to the physical world so completely that when his body failed, his mind remained behind. Trapped, conscious, unable to move on, unable to escape, experiencing every second of death as an eternal present moment with no hope of release. The journal ended with a single sentence repeated over and over until the handwriting became illegible. He had made a terrible mistake. He wanted help. He needed someone to undo what he had done. He was trying to call out, trying to reach anyone who might understand, trying to knock loud enough that someone would finally hear him. The county cleared the house, removed the symbols, sold the property to developers who tore it down and built condos. The phone line was permanently decommissioned. The number was retired from service completely, but I still hear it sometimes in the static between calls. That wet breathing, that desperate knocking, that scraping sound of fingernails against wood as something tries to claw its way back into a world that has already moved on without it. Edward Marsh taught me something terrifying about the nature of fear and the danger of getting exactly what you wish for. He did not want to die. He succeeded. And now he gets to experience the horror of consciousness without end. Awareness without escape. Existence without the mercy of oblivion. Some nights when my shift is slow and the console is quiet, I wonder how many other disconnected numbers might still be calling out from empty houses. How many other people made the same mistake Edward did? How many other souls are trapped in that space between life and death, knocking and breathing and scraping against the walls of their own created prisons? And I wonder what they hear when someone finally answers. If they feel relief that contact has been made, or if they feel only deeper horror knowing that even when someone hears them, there is nothing anyone can do to set them free. The phone on Maple Ridge Road is gone now. But somewhere in the network of disconnected lines and terminated numbers, I think Edward Marsh is still trying to call. Still knocking 3 times with pauses between. Still hoping someone will understand his message and know how to break the binding that keeps him locked in endless darkness. I hope no one ever answers. I hope that number stays lost in whatever digital graveyard holds all the communications that should have ended but somehow continue. Because some calls are not asking for rescue. Some calls are just proving that there are fates worse than death and that the most terrifying prisons are the ones we build for ourselves when we refuse to let go. Story 7. Locked House. There is a police report that the state of Pennsylvania sealed without explanation. I have held it in my hands. I have read every word. And now I cannot stop thinking about what those officers found inside that locked house on Morrison Avenue in October of 2018. My name is James Kirkwood, and I am a researcher who specializes in unsolved cases and abandoned police investigations. I have spent the last 8 years digging into cold cases, reading through public records, and trying to find patterns in incidents that official agencies have deemed closed. Most of the cases I pursue lead nowhere, but some of them lead to things that make me question everything I thought I understood about the world and what happens in the places where we sleep. The sealed report was buried in a file box at the county courthouse. A clerk who had worked there for 32 years told me about it when I was researching missing persons cases in the area. She said there was a report from October that had been classified and sealed by order of the state police. She said she had seen it once, years ago, before they locked it away. She said the contents were deeply disturbing, She said the responding officer who filed that report had requested a transfer to another department just weeks after submitting it. She said he had never spoken about the call again. I spent 6 months filing Freedom of Information requests. I contacted lawyers. I reached out to the state police directly. Most of my requests were denied or ignored. But then I found a different avenue. I found an archive of police reports that had been digitized before certain cases were officially sealed. And buried in that archive was a partial copy of the report from Morrison Avenue. Not the complete version, but enough to understand what had happened that night. Enough to understand why it had been locked away. The call came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. A 911 hang-up from a residence on Morrison Avenue in a small Pennsylvania town. No voice, no indication of an emergency. Just the sound of a phone being dialed and then disconnected. Standard protocol dictated that officers respond to all hang-up calls. You never know if someone is unable to speak. You never know if it is a kidnapper holding a phone. You never know if it is a genuine emergency or just an accident. Officer Marcus Hayes responded to the call. He was a 19-year veteran with a clean record and a reputation for being thorough. He had responded to hundreds of calls. Most of them were nothing, but this one was different. This one was something that would haunt him for the rest of his career and beyond. When Officer Hayes arrived at the house, he found it dark and quiet. No signs of emergency, no broken windows or forced doors. The front entrance was locked. He knocked on the door. Nobody answered. He walked around the perimeter of the house, checking windows and doors. Everything was secure. No indication of a break-in or disturbance. He was about to leave when he noticed something through the front window. There was movement inside the house. Not the movement of a person. Something else. Something that did not quite match the way a human body would move. He called for backup immediately. His voice on the radio was calm, but the dispatcher noted that he requested additional units. He said he was investigating suspicious activity inside a residence. He said the doors were locked from the inside. He said there was movement that he could not explain. 2 additional units responded. Officer Hayes let them in through a window he forced open in the back of the house. The 3 officers entered together. The house was dark. They used flashlights to navigate through the rooms. And what they found inside began a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the report being sealed and locked away from public view. The movement was everywhere. In every room. In the walls themselves. It seemed like the officers described seeing shadows moving with no corresponding bodies to cast them. They described hearing sounds that came from places where nothing could be making noise. They described a sense of overwhelming wrongness that filled the entire structure. The air felt thick, the temperature dropped as they moved through the house. And the movement patterns were completely inexplicable. Officer Hayes filled out the official report. I read portions of it in that partial archive copy. He wrote about unidentified movement patterns that violated the basic principles of physics. He wrote about shadows moving independently from any light source. He wrote about sounds that could not be explained by any normal mechanism. He wrote about a sense of presence in that house that felt intelligent and aware and deeply hostile toward human beings. The report stated that the officers had searched every room. They had found no intruders. They had found no explanation for the movement patterns they had witnessed. They had found the house completely locked from the inside with no indication of forced entry. Yet the movement continued, the wrongness persisted, and the officers became increasingly terrified as they remained inside. Officer Hayes documented his growing sense of dread. He wrote about the darkness seeming to have texture and weight. He wrote about the movement patterns becoming more aggressive as the officers moved through the house. He wrote about one of the other officers, Officer David Simmons, reporting that something was grabbing at him. Not physically grabbing, something else, something that felt like pressure on his mind, like an attempt at direct contact with his consciousness. The 3 officers left the house. Officer Hayes locked it back up. He and his team stood outside while he filled out the initial report on scene. And then something happened that changed the entire nature of the investigation. Officer Simmons collapsed. Not a physical collapse. His mind simply shut down. He fell into a state of catatonia. He was unable to speak or move or respond to external stimuli. An ambulance was called. Officer Simmons was taken to the hospital. He would remain hospitalized for 3 weeks. When he was finally released, he had no memory of the incident. He could not recall entering the house or witnessing anything unusual. It was like his mind had simply erased the entire experience. The county police contacted the state police. They reported the incident. Within 48 hours, the state police had taken control of the investigation. The sealed report appeared days later. And shortly after that, Officer Hayes requested a transfer to another police department in a different county. He was approved immediately. Nobody asked questions about why he was leaving. Nobody pushed for an explanation. It was like the entire incident was being quietly swept away. But I had found the partial report. I had read the documentation of what those 3 officers had witnessed. And I became obsessed with understanding what was actually happening in that house on Morrison Avenue. I drove to Pennsylvania. I found the street. I found the house. And I understood immediately why the report had been sealed. The house looked normal from the outside. It was a 2-story colonial with white trim and black shutters. The landscaping was overgrown. The paint was peeling slightly. It looked like any other abandoned house in any other small town. But standing on the sidewalk looking at it, I felt something deeply unsettling. The air around that property felt wrong. It felt like the darkness was concentrated there, like something was waiting behind those windows and doors, watching anyone who came near. I tried to find the current owner. The property records showed that the house had been owned by a corporation that had since dissolved. The house itself had been tied up in legal proceedings for years. It sat empty, abandoned, waiting. I could not find anyone who had lived in it since the incident with Officer Hayes. I began interviewing people in the town. Most of them did not know about the incident. The official story was that Officer Hayes had simply requested a transfer. His departure was noted and then forgotten. But a few people remembered something. An older woman who had lived on Morrison Avenue at the time said she had seen police cars outside that house late on a Tuesday night. She said she had heard something strange coming from inside it, a sound like wind, but wrong somehow. A wind that seemed to come from nowhere and move in patterns that wind should not move. A man who worked at the local diner said that Officer Hayes had come in a few days after the incident. He had looked like someone who had not slept. He had aged years in just a few days. His hands were shaking. He drank coffee and stared at nothing for hours. He left a large tip and never came back. I drove to the county where Officer Hayes had transferred. I found him. He was now a sergeant and worked at a different police station. He would not speak with me at first, but I showed him a copy of the partial report. I told him I knew what had happened. I told him I was trying to understand. And slowly, reluctantly, he began to talk. Officer Hayes told me that the movement in that house was not random. It was intelligent. It was observing them. It was studying them. It was trying to communicate with them in ways that the human mind could not process. He said that when Officer Simmons collapsed, it was not an accident. The thing inside that house had made contact with his consciousness. It had tried to merge with him or understand him or pull him into whatever dimension or reality that thing inhabited. Officer Hayes said that after leaving the house, he had experienced terrifying dreams. In the dreams, he was back in Morrison Avenue, back in that dark house. But the interior was different. It was impossibly large. Hallways went on forever. Rooms contained things that should not exist. Shadows moved with purposeful intention, and something was trying to show him something, trying to explain something to him. Something terrifying and important and utterly incomprehensible. He said that he had left the department to escape the dreams. He thought that if he moved to a different town, a different police station, the dreams would stop. They did not. The dreams continued for years. Eventually they faded, but they never completely disappeared. And Officer Hayes said he knew with absolute certainty that the thing in that house was still aware of him. It had touched his mind, and that touch had created a permanent connection. I asked him what the state police had found when they investigated. He said they had sealed the report because what the officers had documented was impossible to explain without sounding insane. The state police had conducted their own investigation of the house. They had found nothing unusual, no explanation for the movement patterns, no indication of any paranormal activity. But they had also sealed the house. They had classified it. They had made it off limits to any further investigation. Officer Hayes told me something that made my blood run cold. He said that other officers had tried to investigate the house after him. Officers who did not know about the incident. Cops who were called to the address for various reasons. Every single one of them reported the same things. The movement patterns, the wrongness in the air, the sense of being observed by something that was not human. And after each investigation, the officers involved were quickly transferred or reassigned. The state police had learned to stay away from Morrison Avenue. They had learned that something existed in that house that could not be fought or arrested or eliminated through any conventional means. They had learned that direct contact with whatever lived there was deeply dangerous. And so they had sealed it away. They had pretended it did not exist. They had tried to make the world forget about Morrison Avenue and the impossible things that happened inside that locked house. But the thing was still there, still alive, still aware, still hungry for contact with human consciousness. Officer Hayes said that every few years, someone would go to that house. Sometimes they were investigating a disturbance. Sometimes they were trespassing teenagers looking for a haunted location. Sometimes they were paranormal researchers hoping to document something extraordinary. And every single time, the same thing happened. The movement patterns, the wrongness, the overwhelming sense of terror and unreality. And then transfer or reassignment or, in some cases, early retirement from law enforcement. The creepy truth was that the state police had essentially quarantined the house. They had labeled it as a location of active danger, but they could not explain what that danger was. They could not justify why they were keeping it isolated, and they could not risk the public finding out that there was something in Pennsylvania that science could not explain. I left Officer Hayes' apartment feeling like my understanding of reality had shifted fundamentally. I knew that what he had told me was true. I could see it in his eyes. The fear was still there. Years later, the memory of that contact with something utterly foreign and terrifying was still fresh in his mind. I drove back to Morrison Avenue one more time. I sat in my car across the street from the house and watched it. For hours, I watched those windows. For hours, I waited to see some sign of the movement that Officer Hayes had described. And eventually, as the sun was setting and the shadows were growing longer, I saw something. There was movement in one of the upstairs windows. Quick, jerky, unnatural, like something was moving in ways that normal bodies could not move. I watched it happen again and again. Different windows, different patterns, always wrong, always impossible. The darkness began to settle over Morrison Avenue. The shadows grew deeper and longer. And I realized with horrifying clarity that whatever lived in that house was becoming more active as the daylight faded. It was waking up. It was aware of my presence. It wanted me to see it. It wanted me to understand. I drove away from Morrison Avenue as fast as I could. I did not stop driving until I was out of Pennsylvania completely. And I have not returned since. But I know that the house is still there. I know that the movement patterns continue behind those locked doors. I know that the state police are still keeping it sealed and classified. I know that whatever touched Officer Simmons' mind, whatever tried to merge with his consciousness, is still waiting. Still hunting. Still trying to make contact with anyone foolish enough to come near it. The terrifying reality is that there are places in this country where something exists that should not exist. Something that violates every law of nature and physics and reality that we understand. Something that has learned how to prey on police officers and paranormal investigators and curious people looking for a genuine haunted house. And those places are being protected by the same institutions that are supposed to protect us from danger. Officer Hayes told me one final thing before I left. He said that he had received a letter. No return address, no postmark. It had simply appeared in his mailbox. Inside the letter was a single sentence. It said that the thing in Morrison Avenue had enjoyed meeting him and that it hoped to meet him again someday. He said he has never told anyone about that letter except his wife. He said that reading it had filled him with a fear so profound that he had considered taking his own life rather than face the possibility of another encounter. If you are listening to this story and you live in Pennsylvania, understand that there is a house somewhere in your state where something impossible exists. Something haunting, something that defies explanation. Something that has been sealed away by the state police not because they have contained it but because they are terrified of what it might do if it became public knowledge. And if you are ever driving through a small town and you see a house that feels wrong, a place where the shadows seem too dark and the air feels too thick, where you sense an intelligence watching from behind the windows, keep driving. Do not stop. Do not investigate. Do not try to make contact. Because the thing that lives in the darkness of Morrison Avenue has taught the state police an important lesson. Some doors should never be opened. Some places should never be entered. And some encounters will destroy your mind in ways that no amount of time or distance can repair. Story 8. House on Sycamore Street. What happens when you knock on a door that nobody should be able to lock from the inside, and something knocks back? I have been a police officer in suburban Pennsylvania for 16 years, and the call that came through dispatch on October 19th will haunt me until the day I die. The address was 2847 Sycamore Street, a quiet neighborhood where nothing scary ever happens, where families raise children and retire peacefully. The kind of place where horror feels impossible until it becomes unavoidable. The call came in at 11:42 at night, a woman's voice, shaking and barely audible, telling dispatch that someone was inside her house. Someone who should not be there. She was hiding upstairs in the master bedroom with the door locked. She could hear footsteps downstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through rooms with terrifying patience. Dispatch kept her on the line, asking standard questions while sending units to the location. I was 3 minutes away. My partner Jenkins was 2 blocks behind me. The woman on the phone was whispering now, saying the footsteps were climbing the stairs, saying whoever it was knew exactly where she was hiding, saying she could see the doorknob starting to turn even though she had locked it. Then her voice changed, became flat, empty. She said one word that made my blood run cold. He, just that, he, not who are you, not please help, just he, spoken with a finality that suggested recognition, suggested she knew exactly who was turning that doorknob, and the knowledge was worse than any stranger could have been. The line went dead, not disconnected, not dropped, it went silent mid-breath like someone had reached through the phone and stolen the air from her lungs. I arrived at the house 70 seconds later. Colonial-style home, 2 stories, perfectly maintained lawn, Halloween decorations on the porch because it was that time of year when we pretend monsters are not real. Every light in the house was on, blazing through windows like the building itself was screaming for attention. The front door was locked, deadbolt engaged from inside. I radioed Jenkins to cover the back entrance while I checked windows. All secured, no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no disturbed frames. Whatever was inside had either been let in willingly or had never needed a door to enter. Jenkins confirmed the back door was also locked from inside. We had a situation that made no sense. A woman had called for help. Someone was in her house. But every entrance was sealed from the interior and there was no way for an intruder to have locked themselves in with her. I made the decision to breach, use the steel ram we carry for exactly these situations, and hit that front door with everything I had. The deadbolt gave way. The door swung open, revealing a hallway that looked completely normal. Family photos on walls, shoes lined up neatly by the entrance, mail stacked on a side table. Everything peaceful and domestic and wrong in ways I could not articulate. The house was silent. Not quiet, silent. There is a difference. Quiet still has ambient noise. Still has the hum of appliances and settling foundations and air moving through vents. This was the absence of sound. This was a void that pressed against my eardrums and made me aware of my own heartbeat thundering too loud in the emptiness. Jenkins and I moved through the ground floor with weapons drawn and flashlights cutting through shadows that seemed too thick for a fully lit house. The living room was untouched. Kitchen clean. Dining room empty. No signs of struggle. No overturned furniture. No blood. Nothing to indicate violence except the terrifying knowledge that somewhere upstairs a woman had whispered for help and then gone silent. We reached the staircase. 17 steps up to the 2nd floor. I have climbed thousands of staircases in my career. None of them felt like this one. Each step groaned under our weight with sounds that seemed amplified, seemed intentional, seemed designed to announce our presence to whatever waited above. The master bedroom door was at the end of the hallway. Closed, a sliver of light showing underneath. Jenkins positioned himself to one side while I took point. Standard entry procedure. I announced our presence, identified ourselves as police, demanded that anyone inside make themselves known. No response. Just that same oppressive silence that felt like a living thing holding its breath. I tried the doorknob, locked from inside. I announced we were coming in and hit the door with my shoulder. It gave way easily, too easily, swinging open to reveal a bedroom that looked like a staged photograph. Bed made perfectly, curtains drawn, dresser organized, nothing disturbed. And sitting on the edge of the bed was a woman in her mid-40s wearing pajamas and staring at the wall with eyes that did not blink. She did not react to our entrance, did not turn her head, did not acknowledge our presence in any way, just sat there staring at the blank wall like she was watching something we could not see, something that terrified her so completely that her mind had retreated somewhere we could not follow. I approached slowly, speaking in the calm voice we use for trauma victims and people in shock. I asked if she was hurt. Asked if she could hear me. Asked where the intruder was. She did not respond. Did not move. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but otherwise she might as well have been a statue. Jenkins checked the closet while I checked under the bed and behind furniture. The room was empty. The attached bathroom was empty. The window was locked from inside. There was nowhere for anyone to hide and no way for anyone to have left. I radioed for an ambulance and tried again to get a response from the woman. This time she blinked, slow and deliberate. Then her mouth moved. No sound came out, but I could read her lips. She was saying the same word over and over. He. Paramedics arrived and took her to county medical for evaluation. She never spoke again that night. Never explained who he was or what had happened in that bedroom or why she had called 911 claiming an intruder was in her house when we found no evidence anyone else had been there. I stayed behind to process the scene. That is when I found the photographs. They were in a drawer in her nightstand. Old Polaroids from the 1980s based on the fading and the fashion. Pictures of the woman when she was younger, maybe college age. with a man I did not recognize. They looked happy in most of the photos, looked like a normal couple doing normal things. Except in the last photo, something was different. They were standing in front of this same house, this same porch, this same front door. And the man was not looking at the camera. He was looking at her. And his expression was wrong, was too intense, was the look of someone who loved something so much they would never let it go no matter what. I flipped the photo over. Written on the back in faded ink was a name and a date. Thomas, October 19th, 1987. Exactly 36 years ago to the day. I ran the name through our database. Thomas Brennan, reported missing in October of 1987. Last seen with his girlfriend who lived on Sycamore Street. The girlfriend had told police they had an argument. He left upset, and she never saw him again. The investigation went cold. The case was never solved. Thomas Brennan had simply vanished into the darkness and never returned. Until tonight. I went back upstairs with a growing sense of dread. Searched that bedroom more carefully. Checked for hidden spaces, loose floorboards, any place someone could conceal themselves. Behind the dresser, I found something that made my hands shake. Scratches on the wall. Deep gouges in the plaster like fingernails had clawed at it desperately. And they were fresh, paint dust still clinging to the grooves. Made recently, made tonight, but the wall was solid. No hidden room behind it. No passage, just plaster and studs and the foundation of a house that had been standing since 1973. Yet someone or something had scratched at that wall with enough force to gouge through multiple layers. I measured the scratches, 5 parallel lines, human fingers, but the depth and spacing suggested strength that went beyond normal human capability. This was rage. This was desperation. This was something that had been trying very hard to break through from somewhere we could not see. Jenkins called me downstairs. He had found something in the basement. A space behind the furnace that we had missed on the first sweep. A crawl space that led under the stairs. And sitting in that crawl space was a box. Old cardboard storage box covered in dust and cobwebs like it had been there for decades. Inside the box were more photographs. More pictures of the woman and Thomas. But these were different. These showed the progression of a relationship turning dark. His smile becoming forced. Her body language becoming defensive. Pictures where she was looking away from him. Where he was holding her too tight. Where the happiness had drained away, leaving only fear. And underneath the photos were newspaper clippings. Articles about Thomas Brennan, his disappearance, police reports, search party notices, and a journal, her journal. Pages and pages describing a relationship that had become suffocating, describing a man who would not accept that things were over, describing the night of October 19th when he had shown up at her house demanding they get back together and she had finally found the courage to say no. The journal ended abruptly. The last entry was dated October 19th, 1987. It described Thomas forcing his way inside. Described their argument escalating. Described him saying he would rather die than lose her. Would rather they both die than be apart. Described him grabbing a knife from the kitchen and her fighting him off, the blade ending up in his chest. His expression of shock as he realized what had happened. And then nothing. No more entries. No explanation of what she did next or how she made his body disappear or how she had lived in this house for 36 years with that terrible secret buried somewhere in the walls. I looked at the crawl space again. Looked at the furnace, looked at the foundation. This house had been renovated multiple times over the decades. New floors installed, walls moved, systems updated. Any number of places where something could be hidden, where concrete could be poured, where a body could rest undiscovered for longer than I had been alive. The woman was released from the hospital 3 days later. Psychiatric evaluation found her competent but severely traumatized. She refused to speak about what happened that night, refused to explain who she thought was in her house. Refused to return to Sycamore Street. She moved in with her sister in Ohio and put the house up for sale. I kept tabs on the property, kept checking for any new developments. The house sold quickly to a young couple who thought they were getting a deal. They moved in on November 1st. They moved out on November 3rd. They would not say what happened. Would not file an official complaint. Just broke their lease and disappeared, leaving behind furniture and personal belongings like they could not get away fast enough. The house has been empty since then. Listed and relisted, the price dropping every month. No one stays longer than a few days. Everyone who tries reports the same thing. Footsteps at night, doors locking themselves, a presence in the master bedroom that makes sleep impossible. And every year on October 19th, the house lights up. Every single light blazing, visible from blocks away, drawing attention like a beacon. And if you are unlucky enough to be close when it happens, if you are foolish enough to approach that porch and listen at that door, you can hear it. Knocking. From inside, slow and deliberate and desperate. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. The sound of someone who has been trying to get out for 36 years. Someone who was buried too deep and sealed too well. Someone whose last thought was that he would never let her go. And he never did. I think about that call sometimes. About the terror in her voice when she whispered that someone was inside. About the way she said he with such finality. About how the line went dead right when that doorknob started to turn. She knew who it was. Had always known. Had spent 36 years waiting for him to come back. Waiting for the anniversary when the barrier between what she had done and what still remained became thin enough for him to reach through. Thin enough to turn a doorknob. Thin enough to stand at the foot of her bed and remind her that some promises cannot be broken no matter how much concrete and time you pile on top of them. The house still stands on Sycamore Street. Empty. Waiting. Every light burning bright one night a year while something inside continues knocking. Continues trying to break free. Continues keeping a promise made in blood and terror and a love that refused to die even when everything else did. I will never forget that address. We'll never forget the silence that greeted us when we breached that door. We'll never forget the look on that woman's face as she stared at a wall and mouthed the name of someone who should have been gone forever but instead had found a way to come home. Some doors should stay locked. Some secrets should stay buried. Some calls should never be answered. But on Sycamore Street, the knocking continues. And somewhere in that house, something is still waiting for someone to finally let him in. Story 9. Midnight Repeater. Every night for 7 days, someone called 911 at exactly 12:14 in the morning. Every night, they reported the same terrifying thing. Every night, when officers arrived, they found nothing. But the tire marks kept appearing in the exact same spot on Main Street. And that is when we all understood that something impossible was happening in our small Pennsylvania town. My name is Robert Castellano, and I have been a police officer in Millfield, Pennsylvania for 23 years. I know this town. I know every street, every building, every corner where trouble tends to hide. I have walked these roads during the day and the night. I have responded to domestic disputes and drunk drivers and the occasional theft at the convenience store. But nothing in my entire career had prepared me for the creepy phone calls that started coming in during the second week of November. Nothing could have prepared me for what those calls meant or what they were leading toward. The first call came in at 12:14 on a Tuesday morning. The dispatcher picked up the line and heard breathing. Heavy, panicked, terrified breathing. The caller was trying to speak but could barely get the words out. The dispatcher kept him on the line, asking what the emergency was, where he was located, what he needed. And finally, through the gasping breaths and the fear, the caller managed to say something. There was a man, standing in the middle of Main Street, just standing there, staring, not moving, just standing and staring at nothing. I was on shift that night. I responded to the call along with Officer Patricia Mullins. We drove down Main Street with our lights off, not wanting to startle whoever was out there in the darkness. The street was empty, completely empty. No pedestrians, no vehicles, no sign of anyone standing in the road. We drove the length of Main Street twice. We saw nothing. We found nothing. The dispatcher confirmed that the call had come from a cell phone registered to a man named Thomas Hartley who lived 3 blocks away. We went to his house and knocked on the door. Thomas Hartley answered the door looking confused and frightened. He said he had been asleep. He did not know anything about a 911 call. He had his phone right there in his pocket. His call log showed no outgoing emergency calls. We left his house feeling unsettled. How could we have received a 911 call describing something on Main Street if the caller did not make it? The second call came the next night. Exactly 12:14. Same description. A man standing in the middle of Main Street. Staring. Not moving. Completely silent. But when officers arrived, there was nobody there. The street was empty. No trace of anyone. Officer Mullins said she felt something watching them from the darkness. She said the air felt wrong. Thick. Like something was observing the officers from just beyond the reach of their flashlight beams. By the third night, we were expecting the call. We had officers stationed on Main Street starting at midnight. We had them in unmarked cars. We had them on foot. We had them positioned to observe every angle of the street. And at exactly 12:14, the 911 call came in. Same report, same description. Man standing in the street, staring. Officers moved immediately to intercept. But when they reached the location described in the call, Main Street was empty. Completely empty. Like the man had never existed at all. But that is when we noticed something terrifying. There were tire marks on the pavement. Fresh tire marks. Dark, heavy impressions in the asphalt. They formed a pattern, like a vehicle had pulled to the curb, stopped, and then quickly accelerated away. Officer Mullins measured the marks. The tire width suggested a large truck or SUV. The pattern of the skid marks indicated that whatever had made them had moved quickly and erratically, like the driver had been in a state of panic. The fourth night brought the same call. Same time, same report, but now we were watching. And now we saw something that made no sense at all. The tire marks appeared without any vehicle present to make them. Officers witnessed the moment they appeared. They said it was like the asphalt was being scarred by an invisible force. Like something that we could not see was pulling to the curb and accelerating away, leaving marks in the real world even though nothing visible was doing the scarring. I began documenting everything. I pulled every piece of evidence we had collected. I reviewed all of the 911 recordings. And I noticed something deeply unsettling. The breathing on those calls was always the same. The panic was consistent. The exact words used to describe the man in the street were identical from call to call. It was not like different callers reporting the same event. It was like the same person calling again and again, describing something that never changed. Something that appeared at the same time every night. The fear in the town was palpable now. People locked their doors. Parents kept children inside after dark. Businesses shut down early. And every night at exactly 12:14, the call came in. Every night, officers responded. Every night, Main Street was empty. Every night, the tire marks appeared. On the fifth night, I stationed myself directly on Main Street. I sat in my patrol car with the engine off, headlights off, watching the street in complete darkness. I wanted to be there when it happened. I wanted to see whatever was creating those tire marks. I wanted to understand the horrifying truth about these calls. Midnight came and went. I sat in the darkness, watching, listening, waiting, and as the clock approached 12:14, I felt something change in the air around me. The temperature dropped. My breath became visible in small clouds. The darkness seemed to deepen. It seemed to become more solid, like the night itself was pressing down on me with physical weight. Then I heard it, not a sound exactly, a vibration, like something was approaching from a direction I could not pinpoint. It was not coming from the street. It was not coming from the air. It was coming from everywhere at once, from inside the darkness, from within the shadow itself. And that is when I understood something that made my blood run cold. Whatever was making those calls, whatever was creating those tire marks, was not entirely in this world. At exactly 12:14, the tire marks appeared. I saw them forming on the asphalt. I saw the pavement being scarred by something invisible, something that moved with intent and purpose, something that knew exactly where to stop and when to accelerate. And the terrifying part was that I could feel it watching me. The presence that created those marks was aware of my presence. It was observing the observer. I tried to move. I tried to start my engine and accelerate toward the marks. But my hands would not obey. My body was paralyzed by fear so profound that it overrode my ability to function. I sat frozen in my car, watching those impossible marks being made by a force I could not see, feeling the weight of some incomprehensible attention focused directly on me. When the marks stopped appearing, when the presence receded back into whatever dimension or reality it normally inhabited, I was able to move again. I put the car in gear and rushed to the location where the marks were most prominent. Officer Mullins arrived seconds later. We both stood looking at the scarred asphalt. The marks were real, physical, proof that something had happened. But there was no vehicle, no driver, no logical explanation. We took measurements and photographs. We collected samples of the asphalt dust that had been disturbed by whatever had created the marks. But even as we worked, I knew we would find nothing that explained what we were witnessing. This was something that existed outside the normal rules of reality, something that could cross from whatever realm it inhabited into ours, but only for a moment. Only long enough to create those terrifying marks. The sixth night was different. The call still came at exactly 12:14. But this time, the caller said something new. The man standing in the street was moving. He was turning his head. He was looking directly at the caller. And his face was wrong. The features did not match any human proportions. The eyes were too far apart. The mouth was too large. The skin was the wrong color. Gray, pallid, like something that had been dead for a very long time but was still somehow capable of movement. Officer Mullins said she wanted to cancel the 911 calls. She wanted to tell dispatch to stop accepting calls about Main Street. She said that whatever was happening, we were feeding it by responding. By standing on Main Street at midnight, by directing our attention to the reports, we were giving it exactly what it wanted. We were inviting it to make contact. I disagreed. I said we had to understand what was happening. We had to investigate. And I volunteered to spend the night on Main Street again. This time, I was going to stay awake through the midnight hour. I was going to watch. I was going to see if the thing that called 911 every night would do anything different now that we understood it was not human. I sat in my patrol car on Main Street, alone, waiting for midnight. The darkness pressed down on me with increasing force as the hour approached. I could feel something gathering in the shadows. Something was preparing to manifest. Something terrifying and hungry and utterly alien to everything I understood about the world. At 12:14, the tire marks appeared as always. But this time, I heard something else. A voice, not the voice of the 911 caller. Something deeper. Something that resonated in a frequency that made my entire body vibrate. It was trying to communicate, trying to tell me something. And despite my terror, despite every rational part of my mind screaming at me to flee, I understood what it was trying to say. It was not calling for help. The calls were not emergency reports. They were invitations. Every night for 7 nights, it had been inviting us to come to Main Street. It had been calling us again and again, using words and descriptions that would compel officers to respond. It had been testing our reactions, studying us, preparing us for something that was about to happen. And on the 7th night, everything changed. The call came at 12:14 as expected. But this time, there were multiple voices on the line. Multiple reports coming from different locations around Millfield. A man standing in the street at the corner of Main and Oak. Another man standing in the parking lot of the abandoned department store. Another man standing in the schoolyard. Another standing in the forest just beyond town limits. They were everywhere, multiplying, spreading throughout Millfield like an infection. Officers were dispatched to every location. I went to the schoolyard where one of the figures had been reported. When I arrived, there was nothing there, just empty grass and darkness and the eerie feeling of being watched from all sides. Officer Mullins went to the department store. She reported seeing movement in the windows, shadows moving with unnatural fluidity, shapes that did not conform to any human silhouette. And then the tire marks appeared everywhere, not just on Main Street, on every road in Millfield, on the parking lots of businesses, in driveways and alleys and anywhere a vehicle could travel. It was like something was driving through our entire town, invisible, unseen, leaving its mark on the pavement. And we could do nothing but watch it happen. The scariest part came when I realized the pattern. The tire marks were not random. They were forming a shape, a design. All across Millfield, the tire marks were creating an enormous symbol or sigil that would only be visible from above. From an aerial perspective, like someone was drawing something on the surface of our town, drawing something that would be seen by observers in the sky. By the 8th night, no calls came. Main Street was silent. The tire marks remained on the pavement, physical proof of what we had experienced, but no new marks appeared. The town seemed to hold its breath. We all waited for something to happen, for the other shoe to drop, for the terrifying implications of what we had witnessed to finally become clear. Officer Mullins and I worked the night shift together on the 8th night. We did not speak much. We were both haunted by what we had seen, by the knowledge that something had visited our small Pennsylvania town and had marked it somehow. And we both understood that we would never really understand what it was or what it wanted. A week later, I requested a transfer. I could not stay in Millfield anymore. Every night at 12:14, I would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that the voice was calling again. Convinced that the invitations were resuming. Convinced that whatever had visited our town was preparing for a second wave of contact. Officer Mullins quit the force entirely. She moved to a different state. She said she could not bear being in a place where the laws of reality had been so thoroughly violated. Where something had proven beyond any doubt that there were forces in this world that we could not fight or understand or control. But the creepy truth is that the tire marks are still there on Main Street. Faded now, but still visible if you know where to look. And every year, on the anniversary of the first call, people in Millfield report hearing phones ringing at exactly 12:14 in the morning. Some of them answer, some of them report the same thing. A man standing in the street, staring, silent, waiting, drawing us back to Main Street, drawing us back to witness whatever it is that is being marked and prepared for contact with something that exists beyond our understanding. I have not returned to Millfield in 5 years, but I think about it every day. I think about those tire marks. I think about the voice I heard at midnight. I think about the symbol being drawn across the entire town. And I know with absolute certainty that what we encountered was not finished with us. It was not finished with Millfield. It was preparing for something. Something terrifying. Something that will eventually make contact in a way that will change everything we believe about the world we live in. If you are listening to this story and you live in a small Pennsylvania town, be careful what you hear on the phone late at night. Be careful when you see tire marks that appear without any vehicle present to create them. Be careful when the darkness seems to watch you with intention and awareness. Because something was in Millfield, and it is still there, still calling, still preparing for the moment when its invitations will finally be answered with a response that transforms our reality into something horrifying and unrecognizable. The nightmare is not over. It is only just beginning. Story 10. Basement that did not exist. Have you ever heard sounds coming from a room that should not be there? Footsteps echoing from a space that never existed? I answered that terrifying call on a freezing January night in rural Pennsylvania, and what I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about fear and reality. My name is David Chen. I have worked as a police officer in Clearfield County for 14 years. I have seen accidents, crimes, tragedy, and things that keep me awake some nights. But nothing prepared me for the man who called emergency services claiming something was moving beneath his house in a basement he did not have. The call came through at 2:17 in the morning. The dispatcher patched me through while I was on patrol near Route 219. A man, his voice came across shaking with terror, whispering like he was afraid of being overheard. He said his name was Michael Preston. He lived alone in a farmhouse on Old Mill Road, and something was in his basement, something that was making sounds no animal or person should make. I asked him to describe what he was hearing. He said footsteps, heavy and deliberate, pacing back and forth directly below where he stood in his kitchen. He could feel the vibrations through the floorboards, could hear breathing, deep and raspy like damaged lungs struggling for air. He had lived in this house for 6 months since moving from Pittsburgh for a fresh start after his divorce. The house was old but solid, built in 1942, and it definitely had a basement. Except according to county records pulled up by dispatch while I drove toward his location, the property at 4782 Old Mill Road had no basement. The original construction documents showed a house built on a concrete slab foundation. No crawl space, no cellar, no underground rooms of any kind. Just solid ground beneath wooden floors. I told Michael the first was 8 minutes away and to stay on the line. He whispered that the footsteps had stopped, that everything had gone silent. That the silence was somehow worse than the sounds because now he could not tell where it was or what it was doing down there in the darkness beneath him. I asked if he had ever been in his basement before. He said yes, of course, he went down there all the time. His washer and dryer were down there. His furnace, storage boxes. He described a typical unfinished basement with concrete walls and a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling and that musty smell that all old basements have. Dispatch interrupted to confirm again that no basement existed on the property blueprints or any inspection records. The house had been sold 3 times in the last 20 years. Every inspector had documented the same thing. Slab foundation, no basement access, no underground structure. Michael started crying, said he could hear it again. Not footsteps this time, scratching, like fingernails dragging across concrete. Long, slow scrapes that made his teeth hurt. He begged me to hurry, said whatever was down there knew he was listening. Knew he was afraid, and was enjoying it. The line went dead before I could respond. Not disconnected, dead, like something had reached through the phone and severed the connection with intention and malice. I arrived at the farmhouse 4 minutes later with backup right behind me. Officer Sarah Jennings pulled up as I was approaching the front door. The house stood dark against the winter sky. Single story, wood siding that needed paint, porch sagging slightly. The kind of rural property you see all over Pennsylvania where people live quiet lives far from neighbors. The front door was unlocked. I called out as we entered. No response. The interior was cold, too cold, like heat had not run in hours. Our flashlights cut through darkness, revealing a simply furnished home. Couch and television in the living room. Small kitchen with dishes in the sink. Everything normal except for the temperature and the smell. The smell was what hit me first. Damp earth and decay. The scent of things buried too long. It came from everywhere and nowhere, soaking into the walls and making my eyes water. We found Michael in the kitchen, standing in the center of the room, staring down at his feet. His phone was on the floor beside him, screen shattered like he had dropped it or thrown it in panic. He did not look up when we announced ourselves, did not acknowledge our presence at all, just kept staring at the floor with an expression of such absolute horror that my instinct was to look away. To not see what fear like that does to a human face. Jennings approached him carefully, asked if he was hurt, asked if he could hear us, asked where the intruder was. He finally moved, raised one shaking hand and pointed straight down at the floor beneath his feet. There, he whispered, the basement door, right there. Can you not see it? There was no door, just worn linoleum tile over what felt like solid flooring. I stomped my boot. The sound was flat and dull. Concrete underneath. No hollow echo. No indication of empty space below. Michael started laughing, a terrible sound that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with a mind breaking under pressure he could not process. He dropped to his knees and started clawing at the floor with his fingernails, trying to pry up tiles that would not budge, screaming that the door was right there, that we had to open it, that something was trying to get out and we needed to stop it before it reached the surface. We had to restrain him, had to call for medical support because he was a danger to himself. The paramedics sedated him and transported him to psychiatric evaluation while Jennings and I stayed behind to investigate the property. We searched every inch of that house, checked for hidden passages, examined the foundation from outside. The house sat on solid concrete exactly as the records indicated. No basement, no crawl space, no underground access. Michael Preston had been living in a house and using a basement that did not exist. Except we found evidence that someone had been doing laundry. Clean clothes folded on his bed. The washing machine was in the kitchen closet. A normal setup for a house without a basement. But Michael had described going downstairs. Had described a furnace and storage and concrete walls. In his bedroom we found notebooks. Pages and pages of writing. A journal documenting his first 6 months in the house. The entries started normal. Excitement about the fresh start. Descriptions of settling in. But around month 3 the entries changed. He wrote about hearing sounds at night. About finding the basement door in his kitchen that he was certain had not been there before. About going down concrete steps into a space that felt older than the house above it. About finding things down there. Old things. Things that predated the 1942 construction date. He described photographs on the basement walls. Black and white images of people he did not recognize standing in front of a different house. A house that looked similar to his but wrong in subtle ways. Windows in different positions. A porch on the opposite side. He described touching those photos and feeling cold that sank into his bones. The journal entries became increasingly disturbed. He wrote about the breathing he heard when he was alone in the basement. About shadows that moved independent of his flashlight beam. About the growing certainty that the basement was not part of his house at all but was instead something else wearing the shape of a basement. Something that existed in a space adjacent to reality. Something he could access but should not. The final entry was dated the day before he called 911. He wrote that he had made a terrible mistake. That he had gone too deep. That there were more stairs leading down from his basement. Stairs he had never noticed before. Stairs that descended far beyond where the foundation should end. He had followed them. Had walked down into darkness that felt alive. Had found a door at the bottom. A door covered in symbols he could not read but somehow understood. He wrote that he had opened that door. Had looked into what was beyond. And whatever he saw looking back had followed him up the stairs. Had followed him into the basement. Was now pacing back and forth down there. Waiting for him to return. Waiting with a patience that suggested it had been waiting a very long time for someone stupid enough to open that door. The journal ended with a single sentence repeated over and over until the handwriting devolved into illegible scrawls. It is not a basement. It is not a basement. It is not a basement. Jennings found something else while I was reading. In the kitchen closet behind the washing machine. Scratch marks on the wall. Deep gouges in the drywall. Recent. Made with human fingernails based on the spacing and depth. The marks formed a rough rectangle. The size and shape of a door. We pulled away the washing machine. Behind it the wall had been damaged. Not by Michael. This was old damage. Repaired at some point but visible if you knew where to look. Someone had sealed up an opening. Had covered it with new drywall and paint. Had hidden whatever had been there. I called the county records office the next morning. Asked for the full history of the property. Turns out the house on Old Mill Road had burned down in 1973. Electrical fire. Total loss. The current structure was built on the same lot in 1975 using the old foundation. But before the fire, the original 1942 house did have a basement. A deep basement. Unusually deep according to the original construction notes. The builder had commented that he did not understand why the owner insisted on excavating so far down. Had warned that the depth was unnecessary and potentially dangerous. The owner had insisted anyway. That owner, his name was listed in the records. Thomas Werner. Occupation listed as researcher. No other details. I searched for more information about Thomas Werner. Found almost nothing. Just a single newspaper article from 1943 reporting that Werner had disappeared from his property under mysterious circumstances. His house sat empty for years before finally selling to new owners who never knew about the man who had built it or what he had been researching in that deep basement. The house that burned in 1973 had been investigated for arson. The fire had started in the basement. Accelerant detected, but no suspects identified. The basement had been so damaged that investigators could not determine what had been down there before the flames consumed everything. When they built the new house in '75, they sealed the old basement, poured concrete over the stairs, filled the space with rubble, made it as if it had never existed. But basements are not just physical spaces. They are idea spaces. They are the places we put things we want hidden. And some things refuse to stay buried no matter how much concrete you pile on top of them. Michael Preston was released from psychiatric care 6 weeks later. He never returned to Pennsylvania. Moved to Arizona where there are no basements, where houses sit on desert sand, where nothing can hide beneath you in the darkness. He does not talk about what happened. Does not respond to questions about what he saw through that door at the bottom of those stairs. But I have the journal. I have read it dozens of times. And I believe him. I believe there was a basement. I believe it was not part of his house, but something else. Something that existed in the space between what is and what was. A basement that burned in 1973 but never stopped existing. That Thomas Werner had excavated too deep and found something. That he had opened a passage to somewhere that should remain closed. The house on Old Mill Road still stands. New owners moved in last month. Young family, 2 kids. They think they got a great deal on the property. I drive by sometimes, check on them, make sure everything looks normal. Last week I noticed something. The father was taking out trash. I stopped to say hello, asked how they were settling in. He said everything was great except for one strange thing. Sometimes late at night he could swear he heard sounds from beneath the house. Footsteps, breathing, scratching sounds like something trying to dig its way up. I asked if he had checked the basement. He looked at me confused, said there was no basement. The house sat on a concrete slab. Always had. I did not correct him. Just told him to call if he ever needed anything. Gave him my card. Told him to keep it somewhere accessible. Somewhere he could grab it quickly if he ever needed help in the middle of the night. Because sooner or later someone in that house is going to find the door. They are going to see it appear in their kitchen or their hallway or somewhere it should not be. They are going to feel compelled to open it. To descend those stairs into darkness that existed long before the house above it was ever conceived. And when they reach the bottom, when they find that door covered in symbols, when they make the same mistake Michael Preston made and look through into what waits beyond, something is going to follow them back up. Something that has been waiting in that impossible basement for decades. Something patient and hungry and terribly aware that the barrier between its world and ours is thinner in some places than others. The call that came through on that January night taught me something horrifying. Some spaces exist outside the rules of reality. Some basements are not about depth but about crossing thresholds we should never approach. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again no matter how much concrete and time and denial we layer over them. Michael Preston heard something in his basement. Something real. Something that continues pacing back and forth in the darkness beneath a house that insists it has no basement at all. And every night I wonder how many other houses in Pennsylvania sit on sealed foundations. How many other basements were filled and forgotten? How many other doors wait in the darkness below, patient and persistent, ready to appear for anyone foolish enough to listen to the sounds that should not exist? Ready to show them what waits at the bottom of stairs that descend far deeper than any foundation should go. Dispatch logs close. Reports get archived, but some Pennsylvania police calls still don't have explanations. Subscribe to Vesper Shroud for more true horror stories based on real cases. Because not every emergency has a resolution.